Well, welcome to the Paper Cuts panel at the Printed Matter and Exile book presentation of artist book publishers at NADA Miami. My name is Christopher Kardambikis. I am a book artist, educator, and the host of the Paper Cuts podcast. This panel is available at artistbooksmiami.org, as well as eventually as an episode of the Paper Cuts podcast, which you can download wherever you get your pods. We are recording this in advance of NADA, so we are relying on Zoom today, but I just cannot wait to actually see everyone here in person in the first week of December. It's been altogether way too long. Before we do get started though, I would like to thank Printed Matter for supporting this programming and for all of their efforts to make this show happen. The panel today features Caroline Kern of Pegacorn Press, Kyle Quinn of Raw Meat Collective, and Paul Shortt of Shortt Editions. To begin, I will briefly introduce the panel. From there, I have specific questions for everyone, but we'll open up the conversation and keep it casual pretty quick. Paper Cuts generally works best when the conversation is loose. And it's been, again, like way too long since we've actually hung out together. And I expect that this conversation will flow from a specific organized panel to loose friend hangout and catch up sessions pretty quickly. I've been fortunate to meet everyone in this panel through various book fair events over the past number of years, and I've absolutely loved seeing their new titles and editions and publication projects enter the world. As an educator, I regularly show the works of Caroline, Kyle, and Paul to my students. It's also been a highlight of my education career to regularly introduce my friends through their incredible work to young artists. And now to introduce the panel to all of you. Pegacorn Press is a Brooklyn, New York / Miami, Florida based feminist, queer, total art freaker publishing adventure run solely by Caroline Kern. Pegacorn Press has released over 30 publications using risograph, stencil duplicators, and screen printing. The press creates unique, affordable, and collectible editions to spread an artistic queer agenda to the masses. I'm not exactly sure when or where I first met Caroline, but I was familiar with her zines published through Pegacorn Press before we had formally met, either at a fair or through mutual friends or an early Paper Cuts thing in New York. Her zines have become fixtures in my classes as I regularly introduce the concept of what a zine is to my students with her titles such as Bar Dykes and Primordial Cooch. Caroline's practice is wide-reaching as she has an extensive catalog of video pieces and illustration work. I know her as a generous cornerstone of the publishing community who is always a source for positive vibes.
Wow, thank you. Wow. Now, hey, my day is so much better with just that intro.
This is my favorite part of the panel discussions because I can just like tell everyone how much I love all of you.
Oh, so sweet.
Well, we love you too. I think we met at a fair, but then realized that we had mutual friends.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was trying to like connect each of us to which fair, and I was failing on the years.
I know it's hard when we all do many fairs, well, pre-COVID, BC, before COVID, but yeah, I do want to say that you mentioned Bar Dykes was a collaboration. So, I mean, I published it. Primordial Cooch is my own work, but Bar Dykes was a collaboration with Meryl Mushroom and Faith Levine. And so I just always want to make that clear that it was not totally just me on my own. I was more of the editor and designer and kind of maybe one of the project managers on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to forget any collaborators.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's hard when you work. I mean, my press, it's kind of a mix of my own work and then whatever other projects that come up with other artists that I like. And so sometimes I know it's hard because it seems like the whole catalog is like me, but it's not. So it's always, I like to clarify that.
I think that's one of the really interesting things with artist publishers and the idea of like our own individual personal practice in relationship to the work that we're publishing is something that I definitely want to tease out. And also especially with Kyle and Raw Meat. Kyle Quinn was born in Okinawa, Japan, and currently resides in Brooklyn, New York. He received his BFA from the Art Institute of Colorado in 2010. He was an artist in residence through Altered Aesthetics in Minneapolis from 2014 to 2015, in the Ace Air residency, Ace Hotel's Artist in Residency program in New York in 2016. He is the owner, publisher, and curator for the queer independent publishing house Raw Meat Collective, established in 2015. His personal artistic practice shifts mediums between photography, painting, drawing, and sculpture. His work has been shown both nationally and internationally, with works privately collected. He has been published in Art Forum, Butt Magazine, NYSAI Literacy Press, Hyperallergic, Posture Magazine, ID for Vice, Fader, Tank Magazine, Physique Pictorial, and many more. His artwork has been archived at the Francis Mulhall Achilles Library at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Thomas J. Watson Library at the Met, and the Yale Private Library for his published titles, ephemera, photography, and collaborative projects through Raw Meat Collective and as an independent artist. Kyle is a complete sweetheart. I am fascinated with his practice that incorporates photography, sculpture, painting, and publishing. Raw Meat Collective is always growing and working with an incredible collection of artists, and Kyle brings such raw passion to the publishing project that he stewards. And I have to say also, Kyle, like you were one of the last studio visits that I had in New York in March, right before everything.
Oh yeah, that's great. Good.
Yeah.
You got to see all that crazy work I made stuck inside for a year that no one will see for like 10 years.
Yeah, I feel very privileged to have had that honor.
Good.
And last but not least, Paul Shortt received his MFA in New Media Art from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and his BFA in painting from the Kansas City Art Institute. He has participated in over 80 group and solo exhibitions, both nationally and internationally. He has participated in over 40 art book and zine fairs, including Printed Matter art book fairs in New York City and Los Angeles, in addition to art book fairs in Vienna, Austria, Toronto, Canada, and Baltimore. His artist books are in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of Art, and Yale University. Shortt has spoken about his work at the Olin Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing, China, the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City, Missouri, and the American Sign Museum in Cincinnati, Ohio. He has been written about in Hyperallergic, The Washington Post, Be More Art, and Review Magazine. Shortt is currently based in Gainesville, Florida. Paul and I met, I think, at the 2014 Printed Matter LA Art Book Fair, and we briefly lived in the same geographic region of Washington, DC, and I deeply miss having him so close. I often think about Paul's practice and his constant production of prints, books, sign installations, and performance work, and how it seems to flow effortlessly as he pulls inspiration from seemingly mundane settings to articulate complex ideas about our world through humor and sharp design. So Caroline, Kyle, and Paul, again, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really exciting.
Excited to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So Caroline, I'm going to start with you, or first question for you. And you've been kind of between Miami and Brooklyn for some time now. I was wondering how moving might have affected your practice and your publishing projects. And I ask partially because I feel like your practice does have a sense of place in your books, and partially because I'm so familiar with Pegacorn as a fixture of New York. In some ways, it almost feels like some of the phone videos you've been recording can seem like a way to reflect a practice that is somewhat less tethered to a specific location, something more mobile. And I'm wondering how you are able to see your practice in hindsight, or see it at this point.
It's a very, based on my life, a very complex question.
Yeah.
It does, my kind of living, well, I've mainly been in New York, but I have spent large portions of the year in Miami in my attempt to move back there. That's where I grew up. And there's been a lot of factors related to work and access to healthcare that have kept me in New York. Because, well, and also then COVID, I was here, I was kind of had just decided to, you know, give it another go in New York, where I'm like, I'm going to do another 10 years. And then COVID dropped and I kind of just stayed here because it seemed safer here than in Florida.
Yeah.
Based on the COVID response. but it definitely has, you know, I've basically had most of my studio in a storage unit since 2018, including my resos, which I did bring everything out during COVID and have it in a place where I was living, but everything's been pretty loosey-goosey basically in terms of that. And like literally riding my bike with like, you know, reams of paper to bring them to a location to print it. Or even recently I needed to bring the stack cutter to where I'm staying. So I'm, you know, strapping a crazy stack cutter to my bike basket, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
like totally insane, but it's also New York. And you're like, the Uber driver is going to be mad that I'm trying to bring this in the car. I can't take this on the subway. Can I get it on my bike? You know, like it's just like the, you know, New York life. But yeah, it's, I would say that it does affect my practice. I mean, I'm still very active, I think, with these limitations, but it does make me have to think and plan a lot more in advance than when I had a studio in New York that had all the equipment set up and I knew where everything was. And I think I was way more prolific with that setup, but also was kind of, I don't know, it was a different time of my life as well. And I think like COVID definitely kind of put a damper on some things in terms of my production, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you know, I also did not really ask the question in terms of thinking about necessarily like production problems with being in kind of like a liminal space between cities, but also just thinking about how it might change the way that you're considering what you're producing or publishing, or like your outlook on
Yeah.
work.
I mean, I definitely, from being back in Miami, I definitely think like the the content for most of the books coming up are definitely more tropical themed
Yeah.
and related to Florida and like environmentalism, which is like, you know, some childhood triggers, especially coming back and, you know, being an adult and fully realizing, you know, the effects of climate change on the environment that you grew up in and how different the space is since, you know, even over 20 years based on certain factors. So I've noticed that the books that I'm thinking of for next year are like way more Florida based and also like environmentally minded compared to maybe more of the like I would say queer content of my books, which I also, I mean, I think it's like my multiverse, you know, of my life. I think that's basically, it's like I publish what's happening in my life is what I think.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I can't wait to see some of these new titles that you're thinking about and talking more about that.
Thanks.
Kyle, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the collective part of Raw Meat Collective. You're very much the public face of Raw Meat, and you handle the majority of the operations from curation to design to distribution. At the same time, you developed a growing community of collaborators with the project. I'm curious about your thoughts on your collective project, your individual role in it, and how it relates to your individual practice.
I need an intern after you say all of those things. I mean, in the very beginning, it was only me. I was making zines out of my bedroom, and I was showing the original collages like in galleries. That's when I was doing in Minnesota. So from there, I would do, my first fair, I think, was 2014 in LA when you met Paul, because you had long hair and you kept offering me a chair, but I don't remember. That's all I remember from that fair. And I remember when Shannon was there, he was like, I was working and collaborating with other artists. And he was like, well, obviously this just isn't you. So you should really think of a name.
Yeah.
And then I was in a grocery store, like frankly, high as fuck. And I saw Raw Meat, and it was Raw Meat at first. And then it's like the inside of a magazine almost. That's how I see it. It's like the raw base of a book. So then it's just with people I work with and artists I talk to and people I enjoy. Some people continuously make art. You kind of have to be in the collective at this point. In the very beginning, I was just doing projects that I thought I could see as a book.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, I'm on title 35. So that's nice. And that doesn't even include like the 3 more I'm doing for the fair. So it's kind of nice to be at that point. And it has been a long time, and I should get designers, but I have it so controlled and easygoing that I'm like 6 months ahead now. So
wow.
like I don't really take submissions. It's just people in my life, but also I communicate through like social media with some artists. It's how I curate different projects outside of it. We have a major curatorial project in March. So yeah, it's like does play a huge role with my independent practice. So that's why it's kind of nice to do studio visits like how you and I did, because you see work that won't be a book and I probably won't show until a retrospective and I'm 70, but I'm like continuously always making my own work independently. So for this fair, I'll be releasing like editions, short editions, very unique objects that coincide with new books. But it is a collective. It's not just me. People assume it's just me, or assume that this is like a team of 10 people. And I'm like, oh no, you don't understand. And so I go in order of how I pick up projects. So some stuff comes out next month, January, then March, and then I'm gone for a month, and and then summer will probably be a lot of fun.
I think what's really incredible about the work from all 3 of you is that it's such a like incredible volume of books that do come out that it's sometimes really difficult to figure out. I imagine from the outside just how everything gets done. So I do also appreciate kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit. And maybe we can get you an intern after this broadcast.
Yeah, anyone out there, hello.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kyle. That's great.
Yeah.
And Paul, you've recently been engaged in a multi-year project developing signage that can question or recontextualize the spaces the signs appear in. I'm curious about how you use language, specifically the written word, as a tool to transform spaces.
So I would say back in early 2017, you introduced me to the risograph and working with that. And the first series of things I did were these prints that were like positively do not and please no. And I liked the negative and positive of that language and kind of appropriating that language from street signs. That ended up becoming a series where I would pull text that was either warning you against an action or telling you no, but maybe not directly. And since that time, I've kind of shifted towards using that language in kind of different ways. So like more recently in 2020, I did a book called Signs to Change Your City, which for me was combining the standard language you see on street signs, but kind of trying to reimagine how we could change cities. And I printed it was all ready to go in February of 2020, and then March, everything just kind of blew up. So I waited until I just sat on it, and then in the fall of 2020, I ended up binding it and kind of putting it out. But the language that I used in that book kind of set me towards where I'm at now. So I just had an exhibition in Cincinnati called Signs to Change Cincinnati. And as part of that, I started looking at the language of street signs and appropriating very specific words, kind of condensing what are the most common words found on street signs. And so now I'm at this point where I would make up text and I would appropriate text and then I would kind of combine them together. And now I'm at a place where I'm almost down to just one word for a sign. So I have a new work kind of planned for next year that's just one word signs. But it's all still based in the common kind of pedestrian regulatory street language that you see. And the thing that I will say is I I remove numbers. Like, I'm not interested in the numbers. I'm not interested in speed. I'm not interested in like things that are really about driving, even though some of the language may come from that. I'm not interested in that aspect of it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now, where it's like I've just boiled it down to one word.
Yeah, that's a pretty fascinating place to be in, to like sharpen it so finely.
Yeah, I mean, I think during the pandemic, it kind of forced me to slow down a little bit. And I purchased a vinyl cutter, so I started doing these vinyl on paper works that were kind of taking the materials that you use for street signs and playing with putting them on paper, which kind of makes them not as archival, and kind of not putting them on a different substrate kind of changed the meaning of them. But I became really focused on works that were about like time and emergencies. More recently, I did a show that was about flooding, and like that was actually in Miami at the Laundromat Art Space. And it was all signs that were about flooding, but I was trying to intentionally make the works like extremely decorative and kind of colorful, as kind of almost like a contradiction of like the fact that like signs, they're kind of like the failure of signs to actually address systemic problems and change. Like we're much more reliant on, okay, well, we'll just put a sign up instead of actually addressing this issue. Like, okay, don't drive through here, it's flooded. Like we don't actually want to create the change that will make that not flooded. So
yeah, almost reflecting like the inability of language to actually change the space.
Yeah. So in some ways that show was about the failure of signs, whereas the Signs to Change Your City is kind of about the potential of signs. And so I kind of find myself in this place. And visually all the works kind of mimic the reflectiveness of street signs, and that they're all kind of bright and colorful. And future work will kind of move away from color, I think. So possibly.
Well, that'll be interesting. You have such a strong use of color. I kind of want to like pick at something that all of you have like talked about, and that is like we can't really ignore the fact that we are here at a certain point during the pandemic. And I'm just curious about all of your practices during this time period. Like, how has your relationship to time, or the way that time has flowed over the past like almost 2 years, like affected your practice, and how it, or if it did change your relationship to the work and what you want to be doing at this time of the pandemic and several simultaneous crises. Not to get too heavy very fast, but I know that personally I've really had to take a step back and reflect on what I kind of want to be doing and the way that I'm doing it. And I'm wondering if you all have done the same.
Yes.
I would,
Yeah.
No, go for it, Paul.
I mean, I would say for me, I was like ready to go. I mean, basically doing a lot of edition work, a lot of editions and prints. And the pandemic made me slow down on that and made me do smaller editions, because I wasn't doing like 8 to 10 zine and art book fairs a year. I was doing nothing. Like I was doing a virtual one where I'm only going to make 1/4 of what I would make in an in-person fair, even that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of forced me to be like, oh, well, maybe I should focus on more one-off type works that aren't editions. And so that's really what shifted my work. And I feel like I, in some ways, became a better artist through the process, even though like I had less money and more time. But, you know, it's like I couldn't take as many risks as well, because I couldn't produce any new books. I kind of was just at a holding pattern until like really this year, like January of this year. So.
Yeah. Caroline?
Yeah, go Caroline.
Oh, Kyle, you go.
I mean, it's totally made me like reevaluate the collective as a whole and what I spend money on, how many I produce, like exactly like what Paul said. We weren't doing fairs, we weren't traveling, we weren't spending money on these things in hotels that people assume are covered that are not, that fairs are expensive. So instead I've refocused, and I mean, I once had a studio visit with someone who will probably watch this, who told me that not making zines made him less turned on to my work. so that he wanted to purchase less. And to me, that was like a dig. So as the collective has been growing over the past year, I'm like, I only want a hardbound book. I want a hard case book. I want beautiful things, but I'm going to produce less and consume less. But I want to just reevaluate everything as a whole. Change like to quarterly items, don't release as much. Like Paul's right, we just can't do as many things and we're restricted. And we you either stop or you accommodate to that somehow.
Well, there's also like the whole supply chain issue, which is, I've really been feeling the effects of that. Like even in this recent, I ordered over 20 reams of paper for all the projects that I'm trying to print this week, like right now. And there was issues of even getting the paper and having to speak with the paper mill like multiple times about, well, what do you have? And related to shipping and all these issues with shipping. And it's kind of been like, obviously, besides like the death and despair of COVID, just the trickle down effects of how that affects your daily life. And yeah, people aren't consuming as much. And it's funny, Paul mentioned buying a vinyl cutter. I bought a vinyl cutter last year. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm at home. I want to learn a new thing. What can I do? And I noticed, I was like, I'm not tabling. I used my vinyl cutter to then make a silk screen to screen print masks. And then we're setting and sewing masks for months. And because I was like, no one needs a book right now. They need a mask. So yeah, I think, this great reckoning that everybody's had about how they're spending time, what are worthwhile, like, just this larger reevaluation of maybe how we've all been living and what we've been doing, and can we really go the rate that we were going before of like doing, like 10 fairs a year, or, I was even kind of before COVID kind of questioning like the model of how many fairs can I do a year, just logistically, and how much energy, because they do require a lot of energy. And also I should say, like, I've had a concussion for the past 5 years and wasn't actually formally, it was like untreated up until last year.
Oh, wow.
And so through that, I've had to reevaluate my relationship to work, because some of these things that we were doing will really, you go do a fair, you're wiped out. It requires so much planning to go and do all of it. You're making the books, you're collaborating for months, you're making the books, you're producing, you got to ship it there, or you got to bring it there, you got to get there, you got to get the hotel. It's like, I think people, from Instagram life, they think like, oh, wow, it's all fun because you only post the fun points.
Yeah.
You don't post all the pictures of, actually, I started posting pictures of like, this is what, like last night at 1 a.m. at Port Authority, this is what 250 planner guts look like in a box being hauled on the subway. Like the backside of this, like this is, you sit and you collate books for hours. Like, I think people just think it just miraculously shows up, like you dream of it, and then it like just your resew book, you're like, I want a resew book, and you're like, voila. No, it takes
nothing
so
ever
much.
goes wrong in the resew process.
Yeah, like you're literally touching every single piece of paper multiple times.
I have
So
yeah. No, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Let's say I have 5 risographs. Not one of them is working right now. So
Yeah.
I got the print St. Pete to get printed, and they were really lovely. And then Woolley Press in Asheville, North Carolina. But like, I was going to have 2 new books for the fair, and there's a tech who can come out, but he's 2 hours away, and he's like, well, I can't, if I come out here, that's my whole day, so I'll let you know when I can come out. So like, I had to make a decision like a couple weeks ago to be like, no, I'm just going to pay other people to print these things, because I don't think I'm going to have a new book otherwise for these fairs, and that's, and the risograph problems and breaking, like, it's just a common, like, no one wants to talk. I mean, reso people want to talk about it, but like, people at your table don't care. They just want the finished book, which is what you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt, but.
No, it's true. It's like my equipment has been in my my storage unit. So I've been, for the past couple of years, renting time at Endless Editions, and paying for it that way. And then recently, because of the hurricane that came through, my storage unit flooded and damaged a bunch of my reso equipment. So I'm just like, and everybody's, it's so funny what people think is happening versus the reality. We're like, oh wow, reso printing. I'm like, I just opened a drum and it was full of water. So I feel you on the 5 machines, because I did have 2, and then I love my old one, but I was like, you can't move these 300-pound printing, pieces of equipment around over 12 times now. Like, maybe you should just let it go and start renting time, at places that have like print shops, instead of, because everybody wants to own a reso. They think like, oh, resos are so much fun until you have 2 or 5 of them that are broken in your house. And then you have to move. Then it's really not fun.
I have 2 in my garage, 2 in my house, and 1 in my studio, which is up a flight of stairs. So
Yeah.
I refuse to, and it's become a parts one, but I'm like, I refuse to move it. I'm like, and if I leave my studio, I'm leaving it here. Like, I don't care, but I'm fortunate in that 2 of the risographs I have were given to me by the Sequential Artist Workshop, which is a comic book art school here in Gainesville. And they didn't have room for them. So like, I got those out. I tried to get drums to as many people that I could in the region who I knew had risographs, but like, I knew some stuff would go to the trash, but I was like, I can't let these go to the trash. It's like, I can't just let that happen, because there are some reuse places here, but I was like, I just have to hold on.
Yeah.
Kyle is right now looking at eBay trying to find a risograph used.
Oh no.
Totally turned on by this conversation.
I have all of you to do that. I'll just hire you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I approached the people that, Print St. Pete and Willie Press, and I was just like, hey, I have this paper I have this book I need to get printed. Can I mail you the paper and the print offs and a shipping label from FedEx? So like, it didn't cost them anything for shipping. All they had to do was their time to do that and their printing cost. And they were really lovely to do that for me, because I was like, I need to get this printed immediately, and not a lot of places are gonna just be like, oh yeah, we'll do that, or they'll still charge you for paper. I feel like I got good rates, at least. So I imagine in New York, there are much better places to get printing done, or more closer places to get printing done where you can just go and print and take it home.
Not really, but you have to know people.
It's expensive here.
Yeah, you have to have some working relationships with people. I mean, PJ from Endless Editions, we've traveled the world doing fairs. And so, once my stuff was in storage, we started doing work trade and other, or pay. We'd figure out some system for whatever project was happening where I would come and maybe like help them collate a bunch of editions, or produce or clean, or help them with studio stuff. But I do find, while there are a lot of people with resos in New York, like unless it's a space like Endless Editions, which is more of like a working print shop studio, most of the time it's in people's studios or in their homes, and they're like, I don't really want you to come over and print for 9 hours, like in my kitchen. Like at my first reso I had here in 2009 was in the kitchen of the punk house I lived in.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, and then, and then it would be like in the living room. I've lived with a bunch of bread and puppet people. So they're like, yes, studio everywhere. Life is, fun. But it was like basically right off the kitchen again. So I couldn't imagine before of having people, because people would say, hey, can I come, and pay to print? And I'd be like, no, it's in my house. Like, I'm sorry.
I think we were actually on a train, Caroline, with PJ when you were saying that you're going to get rid of your reso and just start printing everything with lithography. I think that was like 2 years ago.
I would never have said lithography because I don't know how to do that.
You said some other printing process that was older. But
offset, a tabletop offset.
Offset. Yeah.
Well, the problem with reso is that it's very proprietary, and we've talked about this at like Magical Reso Conference in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And even the models that I had and have, the GR series, have been legacy models, and they just announced last month that they're going to stop making all consumables for these machines. So the problem with that is there's still a lot out there in the world that you can buy, but now the prices already for the machines have been so overinflated for years because of this insane demand. But now that means all the consumables are going to be crazy expensive. And I don't like being locked into any type of proprietary thing like this, where you're like, but I have this machine, but now I can't get the masters or the, you know, maybe all non-OEM stuff, but for masters, it does, I gotta say the non-OEM masters don't look that great when they print.
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying about tabletop offset, and also because it's more mechanical unless there's no electronics really in them.
Yeah.
That's
so
the thing with the Risos, is that like when they break, you're like looking at half of, like kind of like working on a car that's has a lot of electronic boards, and you're like, I gotta fix the timing, you know, and it's like fixing the timing on a car.
Half of my social media posts, I think, are just like me taking apart my machine.
Yeah.
But like, I really appreciate hearing all of you talk about like how this time period has affected your work and how you're thinking about pace and production. I think those are like questions that I think about a lot. And I was trying to think of this time period as a way to reevaluate what I'm doing and how I'm doing it in ways to work in a more healthy fashion. And I swear this will be the last like pandemic related question that I have for you all, but I'm just curious about like this break that we've all had from in-person book fairs. Like, has this changed the way you're feeling about book fairs or the necessity of book fairs, the use of book fairs? And after taking this like fairly long break from in-person book fairs, how you're thinking about this one coming up in Florida? So both like, what are your thoughts about the Florida Fair now and how you're approaching it, but also like how your thoughts about the book fairs might have changed after taking a bit of a hiatus from it?
Maybe I'll go first. I'm really excited. This is actually my second book fair this year. I did the Cincinnati Art Book Fair, which was outdoors. And that's one of my favorite fairs. I just like the community there. But I wasn't able to be there on the first day. I was at up the street for another event. So other people were tabling for me, which was sad for me, because like for me, what I really love about the fair is just like the random conversations and talking to people at your table. I love pitching the books and kind of talking to people. I mean, I wrote a guide on how to art book fair. So I'm like, and you know, with like contributions from a lot of art book people. And like, so for me, like, I just love being at the fairs. I think I've never, well, I guess I'm lying there. I was gonna say I've never done a fair with an art fair attached to it, but me and you also did the Editions Fair in Toronto, which takes place at the Convention Center.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking that this will be like, I'm kind of modeling what Miami is going to be like off of that. Like, it's probably not going to be as busy as like a printed matter fair. The masking aspect is going to change it because it's going to be, but you know, I'm in a tent. I put hand sanitizer on my table and was just like, here, yeah, use that before you touch my books. When I was in Cincinnati, like, you know, like you never know what people have touched these books or what they touch their mouth right beforehand. So I think I'm excited, but I'm also like trying to tamp down my expectations as well of what it will be like. I miss the community, so I'm looking forward to being back in the community. It's like this conversation we've had today reminds me that there's a really great community that's just a key part of being at the fairs, and just like talking about books, talking about machines, talking about fairs. Like I miss that, and I'm yearning for it.
Kyle, you want to go?
Yeah, I would say this last year and a half, like you brought up time, and I love that time. Time is a construct, and I love that time is like I can slow down and focus more on publications.
Yeah.
Even though I was still making work in the studio. I mean, I did a lot of video work during the pandemic. I'm trying to stay away from like centralized projects based on the pandemic, but work that I just was producing that I might have been feeling and emotions during that time. I am excited. I've never been to Miami. Miami should be a lot of fun. I am nervous about the COVID protocol, but obviously, like, I've done a couple fairs where I've hired people. I did a Berlin one that went well. It's just been kind of interesting to see how people have been interacting at things. I did a release in McCarran Park with Zach Greer for his title Shower with Affection, and in my head I was like, no one's going to come out and they're going to call this like a spreader event. No one got sick. I made everyone wear gloves. It was outside.
Really cute.
Caroline came. It was really cute. Everyone had
Excellent.
fun. And frankly, honestly, sales were really good. They were as good as they were online. So I think people are excited to come to fairs. And I mean, just the way people pay now, I've like opened the website up to various forms of payment and people all overseas like it. I will say that like us being trapped inside, sales were good. And then now that everyone is back in person, I think they want that more personal in-person aspect.
Yeah.
Like I have a newspaper, no one's seen a newspaper. Everyone has only seen photos of items. So like essentially I feel like everyone that is going to exhibit should be semi-presenting new work along with work that might have not been seen over the last 2 years, maybe stuff they haven't shown before. I mean, I'm coming correct for like collectors, frankly. So
anything related to printed matter, any fair that they set up or associate themselves with, I'm like, I'm in. Like it is always interesting when fairs have a publishing aspect or publishing section. I don't know, sometimes they're not particularly successful because people don't really pay attention to it, or like people are coming to an art fair. But I think that when you have an institution like Printed Matter, kind of actually being, and Exile Books organizing together to be an aspect of something, it brings more attention to it rather than it being just this side aspect. Because I do think that art book fairs have been, other fairs take note of the popularity of the art book fair world and try to introduce that at fairs, but then they don't really promote it. So I've no names, but have done some publishing sections of an art fair that were not really, they didn't go that well because people are like, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
And then the people who do know just love books and they're like, oh, cool, there's this section. So I'm excited. I mean, I really have missed tabling. There's such a great community within the Printed Matter kind of art book publisher, our community that we have. I miss everybody. I've stayed in touch with a lot of folks, like just even overseas. And like I said, I mentioned before, I'm like part of my table. I'm also showing the books by my good friends at Canoest at Extra Pool, because also I've gone over and collaborated with them a lot. Just because also I think for Miami, I think this is a unique opportunity for people who, there's a lot of folks who here that haven't even been to Miami, to kind of show Miami like what we do. I know as like a teen growing up there, like sometimes Miami is kind of just geologically removed in this weird way. I mean, of course now there's the internet and you can see everything, but I remember being so hungry for zines and other publications as a teenager, and like trying to seek those people out within the community when there wasn't that many. And I think there's a lot more now, but I like this. I don't know, also within Art Miami Week, there's 10 different fairs to also highlight that art publishing is a form of art that should be recognized. Usually there's a lot of people I've done books with have shown in Gallery World. So it's like there's this bridge between the two, and I think it's pretty exciting that we get to all be there and be there together.
Yeah,
that's what's up.
Yeah. I have to say, Caroline, like this is my first time in Miami, so I'm really looking forward to be there. And just like that space of Art Week, combined with having a book fair attached to it that is, as you said, like being promoted and organized by Printed Matter and Exile Books, just makes me feel really good and excited about it all.
Yeah, it's less of like a second. I mean, yes, NADA has already existed and is its a fair in its own right.
Yeah.
But it's less of like kind of an afterthought. And I think that there will be people that, you know, of course they're going to see NADA, but they're going to be like, I want to see what this is about, that it becomes its own event that is, you know, recognized.
Yeah, I'm also curious just to, as we're there, to talk to each of you about everything at the fair itself, because I feel like we all have different experiences with art fairs in general outside of the publishing part of it. And just seeing those two, like these two parts of the same world, like interacting in a different way will be interesting. I also wanted to like build off of something you said, Caroline, like growing up in Miami and trying to like find zines and things that you're really excited about and kind of like open up this like art world weirdness for you. And you know, I said at the top of the program that I show all of your works to my students every year. And I do that because your published works are also ways to open up the idea of what zines and small press or publishing in general can be to my students, and seeing them like have this new model that didn't exist for them before suddenly like opens up what they can do or they think they can do. And that's like so exciting to watch that set of ideas like develop over the course of a semester or like a couple of years with different students. And I'm wondering if you can remember some of the first times that you saw something close to what you wanted to actually be doing with publications. Like what was some of like the first models you saw where you were like, oh, this is something that I can do with my work and it's actually in like the book form?
Well, I started making zines as a 16-year-old in Miami, so 1996. And I think I just kind of fell into it through, you know, being a punk rocker, you know, raver, Miami, you know, kind of weirdo, like just being a teenager. And I was on the city bus and I found a issue of Slug and Lettuce on the seat, which Slug and Lettuce, I'll just say it was like a offset printed punk magazine from the 90s that was like, you know, mainly about hardcore and whatnot, but they had a whole section of zine reviews and etc. And so I can't believe I just found it on the bus and I'm like, oh wow, and I started doing all this mail order. And so, you know, that's how I started doing it. And then living in Gainesville and going to college there and actually having professors that recognize me making zines as like a valid form of art.
Yeah.
Which really, I have to say, helps because I was just going to be doing it regardless. But so I think, you know, it's kind of been something that has been like a slow burn building up for so long that like, it's hard for me to answer your question because I've been doing it for so long that I think when I'm asked even anything like that, I'm like, I don't know. It's just been, it's kind of like when someone's like, oh, you're a good cook. Like, how'd you do that? And you're like, I've just been cooking for a long, you know, like you don't know. Yeah. There's no magic moment of when it happened. It's just been honing your craft for so long. But I do think that it's like important to like point out that most of this, you know, there's like so many different approaches of how people make books. There's the InDesign, there's the very nice aspect, like Kyle's books are always, they're so nice, you know, like they're produced well. And I think for me,
one
it's
right here, a nice hardcover
yeah,
book that is absolutely beautiful to look at.
Yeah. And for me, I think I'm still in this space where such a huge part of my practice is the tactile aspect of it and actually making things by hand. That is like where my headspace is. And for people to understand, you can make books by hand. Because I think a lot of people don't realize that you can do that. And a lot of people do it, but the people who don't realize that are like amazed. They're like, what? Which, you know, then explains why certain things cost as much as they do, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I think that's important to say also that like I'm sure everyone's origin stories are actually quite fuzzy in terms of when these things really started and when you started to like make things and realize that you were making things, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was raised by punks like Caroline in my prior straight hardcore lifestyle. So like I remember one of the first zines I was handed was like an Alf zine on how PETA is garbage. And so it was like staple bound. Someone just gave me a lecture on like how meat is murder. And I just remember being like, this zine's fucking cool. How did someone make this? And then just reading music really, like I have a heavy hand in music. I love listening to music. I have friends who are in bands. I used to design for old punk bands. So hardcore kids love zines and doing like an edition of 8. And I feel like when I was 18, 19, me and my best friend who tattoos me, we'd make zines on record reviews and then just stupid stuff that 10 people would see, but to us was cool as shit, frankly. But yeah, I mean, just getting better or staying and honing what you enjoy. Like I'm very hands-on in my own personal practice, whereas like I want my artists to be the same way. I want them to sculpt or take photos and develop their film. I want them to bring like this really heavy artistic fine art energy to their books, and then the books can show what they produce and how hard they work. I feel like we're all very hands-on people, especially from sitting at a computer, working in our studios, or just hand building anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say I came through it through like independent comics and independent zines and comics, but also like through the library, because my library had books about like the 60s and 70s underground cartoonists, and that was kind of my
Oh,
first
cool.
entry into this world of like independent kind of media. I remember I had a zine, a mini comic that I would give out at like raves and parties, and it was called Free Freak, but it was like modeled after the Fabulous Freak Brothers, which were like a 70s, late 60s, early 70s kind of like stoner comic. And so I didn't encounter these books really until many years later, and for me, the first art book I ever purchased was at like a music show. It was like a Devendra Banhart like zine in like 2002 or 3. And then it was probably like a decade later that I was like in graduate school, and my professor who does like his name's Conrad Bacher, and he does like hand painted replicas of things. So he did like a whole thing of hand painted books, and he was at the Printed Matter fair selling his $200 or $300 wooden books basically. And I was like, wait, there's a fair that's just like all books and artist books. And so like for me, like I was like, oh, I want to go there, but like I didn't have the money to go there, or just, and like I didn't produce enough at that point to participate. Not that I didn't have enough to participate. I didn't have the follow through when I was younger with the comic stuff. And so for me, like I try to really have the follow through now. Like 20 years ago, you couldn't have an artist website and an Instagram to give you a platform to like share your work. So I did a lot of mini comics that went nowhere, not nowhere, but like they didn't have the reach that you can have now. Like now it's so much easier to like make a book, put it online, post it on Instagram or other social media and get it out there. And then now you can go table at an art book fair and get it out. So like for me, like it's been a weird evolution, but like I feel like the fairs are where I feel like the most at home and putting the book out, because like you can see someone hold it, or like you can see this. I remember being at the editions fair, and I had this like $5 book that I did 1,000 of, and so like it was like 50 cents a book, and like I was ready to just give this kid the book. Like she was like super excited, but and she's like, "Come on, can I get it?" Da, da, da. And I was like, I would have just given it to her, but her grandma was like, "Yeah, we'll get it." And that's that kind of moment where I'm like, where you can see in someone's eyes like this is their thing, and they're into it. Like you can't see that online, and that's kind of like why I like being at the fair, where you can see like someone like hedging, like, oh my gosh, I want this. Can I afford this? Can I do this? Like, if I see someone who really wants something, I'll cut them a deal, because I'm like, I want you to have it if this is something that you want to possess and hold and touch and look through, you know, and be influenced by. So that was a long ramble, you know, but that's, you know, for me, like, that's the fun part of the fairs. That's like, you know, there's so much labor that happens in the fairs of, you know, like, so, you know, and I'm going to maybe just use this as a segue from a conversation we were having earlier. I feel like being at the fairs it's gotten better to table at the fairs in the last few years. Like the last year pre-pandemic, I thought the Printed Matter Fair was doing a lot to make it better for exhibitors, not just the people attending. You know, like I felt like there was a waiting room where you could hang out, and like they had snacks and drinks, and they were walking around and checking on you. Like, I feel like things have gotten better. And I think the pandemic is actually going to maybe make the fairs focus more on the health and safety of the exhibitors as well.
Agreed. I think, yeah, that, well, also, I mean, because this whole like long haul COVID situation, long haulers, like more people are aware about how, like, well, that, you know, there's plenty of people all around us who have invisible, you know, illnesses and disabilities and things that we don't know about, and that the kind of like go of the fairs, like it's nice if someone brings you water because you can't leave the table, you know, like,
No,
it's
give
really
me
nice.
give me 4 drink tickets, give me a meal. It would be nice if these fairs like included these things. Like, we shouldn't be having to sit here for 8 hours, not even. Let's talk about how sometimes these fairs are 10 hours and
Yeah.
you have to talk this entire time.
Yeah.
Like, and you travel alone and you don't have coverage. A lot of people don't consider those things. Yeah.
This is the first
gotten
September that I have not lost my voice.
Yeah, because it's important. And I think like what Paul's talking about, like the engagement is so absolutely important with
It
tabling.
is,
And
yeah.
I'm always surprised at different fairs where I see people sitting the whole time and not really talking with people that come by. Because it's, to me, I'm like, I think also from collaborating with other artists that I'm really excited about, or I just feel like their work needs to be out there, and it's important, like Bardykes, for example, it's important for people to like understand that don't realize like that you could be put in like a psychiatric hospital before for being gay, you know, like, and how, where we're at now compared to where we were even, you know, in the 60s, like how, and because so many people don't recognize that, especially younger folks. So it's like important for me to engage with people about the titles that I have on the table. And because otherwise, why am I there? You know, like you
Also,
just have an online store.
our titles are so loaded and so complicated that like we can't just be like, look at this, because I could hand 90% of my work through the collective and people would be like, I don't know what this is. And that's, you know, unless I talk about this title, this artist, this why this book exists, we have to explain that stuff, and fairs give us that leverage. It gives understanding. And like Paul talks about the Editions Toronto, and it was like, personally, that fair was not very good for me. Whereas like I go to LA, people in LA love ULA, want to talk for hours. New York, no one wants to talk in New York, and they want to look at it and leave. So like it
Well,
really
it's also
depends
very
on where you
crowded.
are.
It's
Yes,
it's so crowded in New York versus LA, just to say. Like
agreed.
LA, you know, there's space and people can walk around. In New York, you're like, you can't even, if you're, you know, with the stroller or wheelchair, like don't even think about
Yeah.
going into the zine tent, you know. So it's harder, and I think it can be kind of claustrophobic in some ways for people, where they're like, it's like, you know, every table is a treasure chest of like art and these whole like universes within each book. And you walk into the zine tent and you're like, you see people shell shocked. They've just come off the subway, they walk through, they go to the zine tent the first thing, and they can't talk. They're already overwhelmed. And then you can tell who's already been through the fair. And then they end up there and they have the deadpan look and they're kind of like, I don't know anymore, you know.
I would also like to say that affects sales, because like if you are coming in and you are already overwhelmed and the first person you see is your friend, you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm so excited to see you. I'm gonna go buy 1,000 other things. I might come back. So like a venue is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, again, everyone, thank you so much. This has been awesome to talk to everyone, and I really just can't wait to be at the fair with you all in person to see all of your like magical worlds of books at the tables. But before I release you, I would like to just take a little bit of time that if there is something that you're bringing to the fair that I'd like to tell people about, now is the time. And I'd also love to hear about any new titles.
I'm this year, I'm really focusing, well, it's like calendar planner season right now. So I'm definitely having both of those. It's something I've been doing for the past, I don't know, since 2009 or so. So I am madly prepping, doing all that work right now. And I'm also working on a book with Kat Glennon, which I'm very excited about. It's kind of a companion book to a publication I did with Mike Stoltz that I released at the virtual art book fair. But it's basically like geological patterns, but printed in with Riso, multicolored, and also working on some prints with artists that I've already published books with, or that are part of this whole larger world, like Heather Benjamin, Mike Taylor, and Tom Spurndle. So that's a little taste of what I'm bringing, besides the normal catalog of books that I have. Oh, and the Canoest, and some Dean Samchima.
That's great. I love Kat's work, and I'm so excited to see your new book with her.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm very excited.
Kyle, what do you got? What are you gonna be bringing?
This artist named Patricia Vulgaris is a photographer from New York. Her and I have collaborated on a project this last April. This past couple of years, I've been really focused on different artists. Sometimes when I do fairs, I'll include like 8 to 10 different artists that have created ephemera, a book, a publication, or a zine. This year, I designed this table holder. I'll have like a library in the front of raw meat collective artists, and then on top of the table, I'll be showing small editions, and then 2 new Perfect Pound books. One is with Patricia. During COVID, I grew my hair out. It was really terrible.
It was not,
but
it was great.
You
Yeah, it looks
loved
good.
it. Yeah,
I
I
did.
think you were one of the few people to actually see it. And Caroline, but it was really crazy. But she came over and we photographed me shaving my head. And then I am releasing a book based on Medusa and the Gorgon sisters. It's called Gorgon. And most of the book is made entirely of my hair. So the book is clear casted resin and contains animal bone, other people's blood, sand from beaches here. Just kind of varies, but I'll be releasing a set of 3 of those. So like 3 new books total. And then the final book is called Museum of Modern Art in Porno. And that highlights when you're watching a porno and there's a painting in the background, I talk about that painting. So that is the book. And then it talks about comic artists, different illustrators within gay bear culture world that are lesser known, just highlighting different illustrators and designers. So
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. And Paul, what do you have?
I decided to kind of focus more on like design-based work that I've been making the last few years. So I'll have a new book that's the Don't Let Adulthood Corrupt You and Other Signs. So it's kind of been on the back burner for like 2 years, and I was like, I'm just gonna go ahead and print it. Like I've pitched it places and never heard anything. So I was like, well, I have this book, it's ready to go. So I'll have that. I did do a kid's coloring book earlier this year that's called Signs for Your Bedroom Door. And it's like cream colored, like the French paper, pop tone and cream, and it's got like green printing. I've really been having fun doing coloring books the last like couple of years, and like being like, well, why does it have to be black? Could it be green, or could it be blue, or hot pink is maybe the next one. And then I'll also have mostly stuff within the last 2 to 3 years of sign stuff. Signs to Change Your City, which I mentioned earlier. If a risograph tech magically comes to my house within the next week and a half, I think I could pull out Signs to Change Your City too. I've got the cover, I've started printing half of it. It's just my machine broke midway through. So I had to make a choice to just focus on the Don't Let Adulthood Corrupt You book, because you know how it goes. Like, it's like, well, what's the best thing to focus your energy on? And that's what it ended up being. And then, yeah, no, and hopefully I'll have probably have a few prints and my How to Art Book Fair guide. So mainly signs. So I'm just fully embraced being the sign guy.
Excellent. Well, again, I can't wait to see all this new work when we're all together in Miami soon. And once again, Paul, Caroline, and Kyle, thank you so much for joining me for this. And thanks Printed Matter for making this panel happen.
Yeah, thank you, Printed Matter and Exile Books.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christopher, for setting this up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be able to spend
And you.
time with you all.